We are following some breaking news at this hour. I did want to share this social media post from the Democrats saying that oversight Dems have received new emails from Jeffrey Epstein's estate that raise serious questions about Donald Trump and his knowledge of Epstein's horrific crimes. Read them for yourself. It's time to end this cover-up and release the files. This is some file footage of the late Jeffrey Epstein, and I did want to share some more information on this breaking news. Jeffrey Epstein writing in a 2011 email that President Trump had, quote, spent hours at Epstein's house with a victim of sex trafficking, and said in a separate message years later that President Trump knew about the girls, in quotation marks. That's according to communications released today. Now, the emails made public by Democrats on the House Oversight Committee add to the questions about President Trump's friendship with Epstein and about any knowledge that he may have had in what prosecutors call a years-long effort by Epstein to exploit underage girls.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Trump Mana Empire, and if you still believe Trump had a firm grip on Washington, what you're about to hear is going to shake everything you thought you knew. Congress just drove a stake through Trump's most aggressive power move yet, and he is absolutely spiraling over it. We're talking about a bipartisan vote, Republicans and Democrats standing side by side, to kill Trump's plan to push a nationwide voter ID mandate through nothing but an executive order.
And perhaps most importantly, I'm asking you to approve the Save America Act to stop illegal aliens and others who are unpermitted persons from voting in our sacred American elections. That cheating is rampant in our elections. It's rampant. It's very simple. All voters must show voter ID.
Let that sink in. Trump stood up there and actually believed he could bulldoze Congress and single-handedly rewrite the rules of American elections before the 2026 midterms. And when every lawmaker in the room said not a chance, Trump ran straight to Truth Social and went completely nuclear, posting in all caps, ripping apart members of his own party and declaring that anyone who dared vote against him was handing Democrats the keys to steal elections.
Of citizenship requirement to the federal voter registration form cannot be enforced. U.S. District Judge Colleen Kohler-Cotelli in Washington, D.C. sided with Democratic and civil rights groups that sued the Trump administration over his executive order he issued back in March that included requiring documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections and that all ballots be received by Election Day. She ruled that the proof of citizenship directive is an unconstitutional violation of the separation of powers, as the administration has argued that such a mandate is necessary to restore public confidence that only Americans are voting in U.S. elections.
Let's be clear. This is not how a democracy is supposed to function. This is a president who genuinely believed he could rewrite the entire framework of American elections from his phone, and Congress finally had enough and slammed the door shut. So let's rip this open piece by piece, because the deeper you dig, the more alarming this gets. On February 13th, Trump went on Truth Social and announced he would be issuing an executive order to impose nationwide voter ID before the 2026 midterms. And in that very same post, he essentially admitted that going through Congress, the legitimate constitutional path, had already stalled, so he just threw that aside and decided he'd do it himself anyway. After that, he launched into a full tirade claiming Democrats block voter ID legislation for one reason only: because they need the door open to cheat. That's the frame he uses every single time. Anyone who pushes back on his voting agenda is automatically a fraud enabler. And set aside for a moment that voter ID laws have been repeatedly flagged as barriers that hit students, the elderly, and low-income Americans hardest. People who simply don't have easy access to government-issued ID. To Trump, none of that exists. It's always and only about cheating. But here's where things get genuinely explosive. Congress didn't just roll their eyes and move on. They organized and they voted to stop him. And this wasn't some narrow, razor-thin Democratic victory. This was bipartisan. Sitting Republicans looked at what Trump was attempting and said, absolutely not. You do not get to unilaterally rewrite how this country votes. And when was the last time that actually happened? So the fact that it did happen tells you everything about how alarmed people are behind closed doors. Now, why did Congress finally find the nerve to draw a line? Part of it comes down to pure timing. This vote landed right in the middle of a storm of other constitutional showdowns. Literally days before this, the Senate pushed forward a bipartisan war powers resolution because Trump sent military forces into Venezuela without a single word to Congress. Senator Jack Reed stepped up publicly and declared that Congress had no choice but to reassert its constitutional authority and described Trump's conduct as a profound constitutional failure. And in Senate language that is about as close to screaming as it gets, then, in that same week, the Supreme Court knocked Trump down on tariffs. Trump had been rolling out what he branded reciprocal tariffs, essentially manufacturing new taxes on imports because he disapproved of how other countries handled trade. And the court came back with a hard 6-3 ruling and said no tariffs or taxes, and the power to impose taxes lives with Congress, not the president. It's written right there in the Constitution, and even justices Trump himself put on that bench ruled against him. Legal analysts described it as Trump colliding with the outer wall of his own authority, a diplomatic way of saying the court told him to sit down and stop. So Congress was watching all of it. The Venezuela raid, the tariff overreach, the Truth Social proclamations that read like executive decrees. And they came to the same conclusion. If they didn't draw a line right now, they were going to become completely irrelevant because Trump had spent the better part of a year governing as though Congress were just background noise. He tried to put a ceiling on credit card interest rates through a social media post. He attempted to reshape trade relationships through a tweet, and now he wanted to redraw the map of who gets to vote in American elections the same way. And Congress finally looked at each other and said, this cannot continue. But understand this, Trump is not wired to accept rejection. His answer to being blocked was not to reconsider his position or reach across the aisle like a functioning president would do. His answer was to detonate on Truth Social, branding every dissenter a traitor, insisting Democrats are engineering electoral theft, and then, and this is the part that should make your stomach drop, he floated the idea that he might just sign the executive order anyway. And that brings us to the question everyone needs to be asking right now. Can Trump actually pull this off? Can he put his name on an executive order and force voter ID requirements on the entire country? The direct answer is no. The fuller answer is almost certainly not. But he is 100% going to attempt it, and it is going to detonate into a catastrophic mess. Here's the constitutional reality. Elections in the United States belong to the states. That authority is embedded in the Constitution itself. States control the times, the places, and the mechanics of how elections run. Congress holds the power to regulate federal elections, but the president, any president, has zero unilateral authority to dictate new conditions for voting. An executive order cannot override state election law, and it cannot manufacture new requirements for voter eligibility that is simply not within the reach of the office. But Trump has never governed within reach. He has treated executive orders like blank checks throughout his second term. His playbook is predictable at this point. Sign it, wait for the lawsuits, fight it in every court he can find, and calculate that by the time a final ruling lands, he's already extracted whatever advantage he needed. We've watched this cycle run with immigration, with tariffs, with trade policy. He charges forward and dares the system to catch him, and sometimes it can't move fast enough and the damage is done before anyone stops it. So if Trump drops this voter ID executive order, here's exactly what unfolds. States file suits within hours. Civil rights organizations line up right behind them. A federal judge issues a block, probably within the first week, and then it enters the long grinding machinery of appeals, and all of that is happening in real time as we move toward the 2026 midterms with the entire country in the dark about what the actual rules of voting are. And here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. That chaos might be exactly what Trump is engineering, because even when he loses in court, he gets to spend every single day of that election season telling his supporters the system is rigged, the judges are corrupt, the Democrats are stealing it, and the only reason he might not win is because they blocked him from protecting the vote. His base doesn't need a courtroom victory. They need the narrative, and Trump hands it to them every time. This is the core of his political identity at this point. The entire machine is against me. I am the only person standing between you and total collapse, and every time Congress blocks him, every time a court rules against him, that story gets louder and more electric for the people who believe it. So in a twisted and dangerous way, even his defeats function as fuel. But let's be precise about what's actually at stake here, because this is not just about one man's ego or his political positioning. This is about the physical mechanics of how democracy works. Voting rules determine who participates in elections, full stop. And if Trump successfully rewrites those rules right before a midterm, where his party is staring down potential losses, that is not norm-breaking, that is not aggressive politics, that is election manipulation, and the fact that members of his own party looked at this and still said no, that tells you they understand exactly what it would mean. And Trump's response to those Republicans has been scorched earth. He's tagging them as Rhinos. He's threatening to fund primary challengers. He's telling his base, those people chose the Democrats over you, and that is going to have real consequences because we are approaching primary season for the 2026 midterms, and any Republican who broke with Trump on this vote is about to face a challenger whose entire campaign is built around, I would have let Trump defend your elections. So even with this victory, Congress extracted a price because the message Trump is broadcasting to every Republican still standing is simple. Cross me, and I will end your career, and the more Republicans who get driven out of office for having the integrity to push back, the emptier that resistance becomes. Which means the next time Trump moves on something like this, and there will absolutely be a next time, Congress may simply not have the numbers or the nerve to hold the line. Zoom out for a second and look at the architecture of what's happening. This is not a single incident. This is a deliberate and systematic campaign to accumulate powers that the Constitution never granted to any president. And we are watching in real time to find out whether Congress, the courts, or anyone else still has the structural capacity to contain it. The honest answer right now is sometimes maybe if the circumstances line up, and that is an answer that should terrify everyone, because every time Trump runs into a wall, he doesn't stop. He finds a different angle. He probes a different weakness. We've tracked this through tariffs, through military deployments, through trade restructuring. He pushes until he breaks through or until the opposition exhausts itself and gives up. And if that exhaustion hits with voting rules, if Trump actually manages to lock in who gets to cast a ballot right before an election, his party could lose. We are no longer in the territory of a constitutional dispute. We are in the territory of a democratic emergency, because you are no longer debating policy. You are debating whether the outcome of elections is even real. The urgency here cannot be overstated. We are moving toward the 2026 midterms, and Trump is not calm about it. He is aware his party could surrender the House or the Senate, and if that happens, the entire architecture of his second term collapses. No rubber-stamped executive actions, no judicial confirmations, no legislative wins. So the calculation is clear lock in every structural advantage possible right now. Tighter voter access, suppression of participation, anything that shrinks the electorate in ways that cut against his opposition, all of it dressed up in the language of election integrity and national security, but strip away the framing, and what you see underneath is a raw fight to hold power. CNN has reported that Trump has been consumed by the midterms for months and has reportedly raised the idea of postponing them or reshaping the rules entirely, and this voter ID executive order was a critical piece of that architecture. Make registration harder, delegitimize any Democratic win in advance, build the foundation for 2028 by telling everyone the system is already compromised. But Congress just threw a wrench directly into the engine of that machine, and Trump is furious because it means he now has to fight an election on something close to equal terms. So here's what the next chapter looks like. Trump moves forward with the executive order. It's in his nature. He doesn't retreat, he escalates. Expect it in the coming weeks. Expect the lawsuits to hit the same day. Expect the federal courts to freeze it immediately. And expect months of complete legal chaos landing directly on top of the midterm campaign calendar. And understand that every single day of that chaos is an asset for Trump, even if he never wins in court. He gets to campaign inside the storm. He gets to point at every judge, every Democrat, every institution, and say they are the ones destroying election integrity. And his supporters will believe it because they have been told to believe it for years. So whether he wins or loses on the legal merits, Trump walks out of this fight with something. But here is what cannot be buried and cannot be surrendered. Congress stood up, they drew a line, Republicans and Democrats looked at what was happening and together said, this goes too far, we are not allowing this. Yes, Trump will target them for it. Yes, some of them may not survive their primaries, but they made the call anyway. They looked at a president trying to seize control of American elections and said, we are not handing this over, and that act matters in ways that go beyond this single vote, because every time the system holds, every time someone refuses to step aside, every time checks and balances function the way they were designed to, it becomes harder for any one person to claim they answer to nothing and no one. The precedent is real and it has weight. But do not mistake this moment for resolution. This fight is nowhere near finished. Trump will press harder. Congress may fracture the courts, are not a guaranteed wall, and we are almost certainly heading toward a confrontation of constitutional proportions. Before November, this vote was a line drawn in the ground, and now the only question that matters is whether that line holds or whether Trump puts his foot through it and walks straight ahead. And given everything we have watched over the past year, the only honest answer is we don't know yet, and that uncertainty is the most alarming thing of all. Here is the bottom line. Trump attempted to force nationwide voter ID onto the country through executive order alone. Congress moved in a bipartisan vote and killed it. Trump responded with an all-caps public breakdown, attacking members of his own party and threatening to destroy their careers. This is one chapter in a sustained and deliberate campaign to seize constitutional powers that were never meant to belong to any single person, and the institutions designed to stop that are fighting back. But they are under pressure, and they are not guaranteed to hold. And with the midterms closing in, the stakes are no longer theoretical, because if Trump actually succeeds in rewriting the rules of who gets to vote, the democracy people believe they are living in may turn out to be something far more fragile than anyone was prepared to admit.